and welcome to RT International. I'm Julia Szczypała to our main story now. Just 2 days before the crucial referendum in Crimea, Russia and the United States are in face-to-face talks trying to ease their standoff. Let's now cross live to RT's Polly Boyko. She's in London for us, where the meeting is taking place right now. Hi there, Polly. So quite a gulf between them at the moment, given all the threats Russia has been receiving in recent weeks. Tell us more.
Well, these meetings are a last-ditch attempt for the US, the UK and Russia to come to some sort of agreement over the crisis in Ukraine. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has already had a meeting with William Hague this morning, his UK counterpart, and he's currently in the US ambassador's residence talking with John Kerry. Now, I expect that the US diplomats in that meeting are going to be trying to persuade Russia to not recognize the results of the referendum that's that's set to take place in Crimea on Sunday. If Russia does recognize that referendum, well then the US and the EU have threatened to impose sanctions that would take effect on Monday. Now, Sergei Lavrov, I expect, is going to be reiterating Moscow's position, which is that it's up to the people of Crimea to decide their future. And the notion of self-determination is definitely something that the US and the EU have been keen to get behind in the past. You don't have to look back far to see how the US and their Western partners have at times encouraged referendums and secessionist splits.
The referendum on self-determination.
Self-determination.
Right to speak their language.
Be recognized by more nations around the world.
Shape their daily lives.
Determine their own future. Must take place.
Like when Kosovo voted to carve itself out of Serbia in 2008.
This is what the birth of a nation looks like.
Thank you, Europe. Thank you, America. Thank you, Great Britain.
In fact, the US backed Kosovo's independence 2 years before the UN judged it was legal, and in doing so set the precedent. Then, after a long and bloody conflict in Sudan, a referendum saw half the country break away in 2011 to create the world's newest country, South Sudan.
The realization of this historic day is a testament to tireless efforts of the people of South Sudan in their search for peace.
The US set up its embassy in the new capital of Juba that very same day. Just last year, off the coast of Argentina, the people of the Falkland Islands voted overwhelmingly to remain British. Here's David Cameron consoling the Argentinian president.
I wanted to raise it specifically with the Argentine president and say it's important that everyone pays attention to this referendum. So I think it was the right thing to do.
Again, in Britain, over 300 years of union could all end this September. Scotland's being allowed to vote on whether to leave the union. The Prime Minister says it's up to Scots to decide their future. Yet for all the talk of self-determination, Crimea's referendum has been denounced as illegal by the G7 group of the world's biggest economies. The US has sent fighter jets close to Russia, deploying them in Poland and Lithuania. It's also preparing sanctions along with the EU. So when it comes to self-determination or territorial integrity, your guess is as good as anybody's in predicting which way international powers will side. The biggest clue is whether it fits their own interests. Polly Boyko, RT, London.
And in about 90 minutes' time, John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov are expected to brief the press on their meeting. We'll be bringing you that live. Meanwhile, many fear that any compromise on Crimea is being held back by the West's harsh stance on the referendum. That's the view of former French Foreign Ministry Counsel Alain Cortez.
The European Union accepted Kosovo, but it's against the referendum in Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine is not discussed seriously. It's discussed in an antagonistic way by presenting two absolutely different versions of what's happening. It seems that European countries aren't even trying to find a compromise for both sides in this conflict. The facts are being falsified. They don't want to accept that Nazi groups came to power in the Ukraine. They say they're Democrats, that it's all Russian propaganda.
The German Chancellor has dismissed the parallels being drawn between the referendum in Crimea and the unilateral declaration of independence in Kosovo. Angela Merkel's statement triggered criticism within the German parliament, with left party members lashing out at Europe's handling of the crisis. Let's listen in.
With Kosovo, they opened a Pandora's box. What's allowed for Kosovo, you should also allow for others. I told you this, but you haven't listened to me. Winning the Cold War has eclipsed everything for you. You forgot about everything else. The Basques are asking why can't they make their choice, whether they want to stay within Spain or not. Catalonians are asking why can't they decide whether they want to belong to Spain or not. Of course, people living in Crimea are asking the same thing. I think that Crimea breaking away from Ukraine is just the same as Kosovo. I knew Putin would use this argument, and he did.
What has led to the tensions in Crimea and Ukraine? The problem is that the current Ukrainian government came to power thanks to support from Western powers, which have been actively involved in the events in Ukraine. And there are members of the fascist, anti-Semitic party Svoboda in this government. I believe this will be a never-ending scandal.
Chancellor Merkel has also warned Russia of massive damage if it continues to support the referendum in Crimea, but it appears her stance does not have the backing of the German public, as RT has been finding out.
They should solve it by themselves. I don't think Germany should get involved.
I think the sanctions against Russia will be like a Berlin Wall between the East and the West all over again, and I'm against that.
I think sanctions will harm both Russia and Europe. Maybe they should discuss it behind the curtain first. Give diplomacy a chance before slamming the door.
It is obvious that Ukraine belongs to Europe, just like the western part of Russia lies territorially in Europe. And that has nothing to do with the EU or NATO. Those are different things.
I don't think sanctions are a good idea. They should sit down at the table and talk it out.
At the UN Security Council, Russia has been defending Crimea's right to self-determination against a barrage of criticism. Russian envoy Vitaly Churkin stressed that Moscow is against any escalation of the crisis in Ukraine and again called for an investigation into the deadly violence that brought the opposition to power in Kiev. RT's Marina Portnaya has a story from the UN headquarters in New York for us.
The U.S. and many European envoys use their platform within the council chambers to accuse Russia of building up its military aggression within Ukraine.
President Putin asked for and received authorization from the Federation Council to use military force in Crimea, and today there are reportedly more than 20,000 Russian troops in the region.
Against the express wishes of the Ukrainian government, Russian military forces have taken control of a large part of the sovereign territory of Ukraine.
Russia tramples on the values that led to the creation of the European Union, that were designed to overcome the cycle of invasions, occupations, and territorial claims.
When it comes to Russia's military presence within Crimea, Moscow says it is not violating any laws. Everything is within its jurisdiction because, as we've been reporting, Russia has an agreement with Ukraine that allows for up to 25,000 Russian troops in Crimea. In the meantime, the U.S. has announced that it is circulating a draft resolution seeking to reaffirm Ukraine's sovereignty and unity. It calls on member states not to recognize the results of the referendum scheduled to be held in Crimea on Sunday. Now, Russia maintains that it has been abiding by international law. It is not interfering or instigating in any action in Crimea. The Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, says that the Security Council of the UN usually condemns the violent overthrow of an elected leader, but he says in the case of Ukraine, that is not being done.
What you have in Kiev is a government of the victors. A number of key posts there, including the Minister of Defense, have been assigned to the members of the radical nationalist Svoboda party. In December 2012, the European Parliament passed a resolution that denounced Svoboda's views as racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic. It also stated that they are counter to the fundamental principles and values of the European Union and called on the pro-democratic parties within the Ukrainian parliament to avoid entering any coalitions with Svoboda. So where have their European values gone now?
Ambassador Turkin also questioned the sincerity of many Western ambassadors when it came to self-determination.
In eastern Ukraine, political differences have spilled over, causing street violence in the city of Donetsk. Those rallying in support of the new leadership in Kiev clashed with pro-Russian protesters. One man was fatally stabbed as a result. The Russian Foreign Ministry has released a statement accusing far-right groups of attacking peaceful demonstrators, and the leader of the local so-called self-defense squads thinks the chaos in the city was deliberately planned.
It was a planned provocation when pro-Russian activists were forced to respond to the violence directed at them. On the eve of the rally, there were calls for action to be taken against them on a pro-Kiev Facebook page. Its organizers called for the ultras to nationalist fans of the local football club to come to the protest with baseball bats and iron rods. Those who are giving orders in Kiev just don't understand that the people of Donetsk are on the edge. We are so upset with the Kiev havoc. The nationalist fighters were welcomed to power, given weapons, put into the government, and now all that has come to our doorstep, and the people are infuriated.
And for a closer look into the deep divisions within Ukrainian society, head to our website, rc.com, where we explain why the majority in Crimea reject the self-appointed leaders in Kiev. Coming your way in a couple of minutes, the European Parliament is accused of sacrificing the environment for the sake of short-term profits.